We'll do a review in the Sichas in Chelek of Ches, volume 28. This is the second Sikha for the Parshas Shelach. The Rebbe explains that in the end of the Parsha in the Sikha, by the way, we're learning this, Lilu Nishmas, Harav HaTomim Ashliach, Lev Yitzchak ben Chaim Tzvi, Lilu Nishmosei, Tei Nishmosei, Tzurur B'Tzurur Chaim. So in the end of the Parsha Shelach, it talks about the Mekoshish, the one who was collecting the wood and violated the Shabbos. And right before that, the pasuk talks about the Avodah Zorah, and of course, the major part of the parsha talks about the Meraglim, Shelach, and the Rebbe and the Sikha connects the unique, uh, the unique mitzvah of Avodah Zorah, not to worship Avodah Zorah, with the act of the Mekoshish Eitzim on Shabbos, with the Meraglim's ideas of not going to Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe finds the connection between all of these three inyonim. And the Rebbe goes through starting with the Rashi, Medrashi, the Marshos, a very beautiful explanation in this whole subject, and we'll go step by step. Aleph. In Soif Parsha Seinu bringt Rashi for Rabbi Moshe Adarshan. In the end of our Parsha, Rashi brings down from Rabbi Moshe the Darshan, he says, Lomo nismecha parshas mekoshish leparshas avodas solilim. So why was the story of the Mekoshish, which is the very end of the Parsha, why is it placed next to the portion of sinning of Avodah Zorah? And Rashi brings down from Moshe Darshan, Loimar Shamachalel es HaShabbos Ka'eved Avodah Solilim, to tell us, to teach us that one who desecrates, violates the Shabbos, is as if he violated Avodah Zorah. That's how serious the violation of Shabbos is, that it is as you violate Avodah Zorah, and that's why it's next to it. Sha'af hi shkula kechol ha-mitzvahs chulu. Avodah Zorah, it says that mitzvah, that it's like all the mitzvah, because if you deny the Eibishter, you worship Avodah Zorah, you're denying all the mitzvahs. So also Shabbos is equal, that it's also like if you violate the Shabbos, as if you're violating all the mitzvahs. So here you see that Rashi brings down that there is for Rabbi Darshan, that there is a connection between Avodah Zorah and the story of Mekoshes, the Chilul Shabbos with Avodah Zorah. But we also find a connection between Meraglim and the Mekoshes. The Ramesha Darshan brings the last two parts of the Parsha Avodah Zorah with Mekoshes. But we also find in Tosfos from the Medrash brings down a connection between Meraglim and the Mekoshes. In Tosfos state, in Tosfos it states in Tosfos that the story of the Meraglim took place much earlier, and the story of the Mekoshes took place much earlier. How come the Torah writes the story of the Mekoshes? The story of Mekoshes, matter of fact, took place right in the very beginning, in the beginning of when the Yidden left Mitzrayim. And yet the Torah writes it over here. And Tosfos says that there is a connection. In Tosfos it says that Maisa HaMekoshes Hoyo B'tchilas Arboim Miyad Achar Maise Meraglim. That was in the beginning of the 40 years, as soon after the story of the Meraglim. The Omar b'Medrash, because he says in the Medrash, the L'Shem Shamayim Niskaven. So Tosfos brings down that really, from the Medrash, that while he violated the Shabbos, but he has intention in what he wanted to do is actually l'shem shamayim, for the sake of Hashem. That was his intention. What does that mean? So the Medrash, Tosfos explains from the Medrash. Shahoyu Imrim Yisrael, the Yidden would say, Kivon shenigzar aleim shaloi likonis loretz. After the story of the Meraglim, they were decreed upon them not to go into Eretz Yisrael. Mimaisa Meraglim, because of what the Meraglim did, they wished to punish them not to go into Eretz Yisrael. So the Yidden argued, Shuv ein mechuyavim b'mitzvahs. So they said we no longer have to, not obligated the mitzvahs. The Rebbe will explain this also later on a little more. But that's what they said. That's what Tosfos brings down from the Medrash. So therefore, what was he doing? The Mekoshesh Omad v'chilul Shabbos. So he got up, he desecrated the Shabbos, Kidei sheyahorik. So in order that he would be killed, v'yidrachedim, and others will see. So this tells us very clearly that there is a direct connection between the Maisa of the Meraglim with the Mekoshesh. That's why it's in the Parshas Shlach, the Parshas of the Meraglim. Because since the Meraglim brought about the punishment, they're no longer going to Eretz Yisrael till much later. So the Yidden said we should not be obligated in the mitzvahs. So he intentionally went in Chal the Shabbos. So when he's put to death, he's going to see, others will see that the mitzvahs apply. So that also vizei is move on the smichas from Parshas Mekoshes to Klolus Parshas. So now we understand how the person Mekoshes is not only to Avodah Zorah, like we brought down from Rabbi Shadarshan from Rashi, but also to the general parsha from Tosfos and the Medrash. The parsha talks about the Chet HaMeraglim, and that is what brought about the Mekoshes. Was is that Iker Sipur beParsha Seinu, the main story in our parsha is not about the Zorah. That's a small portion of it, the end. But the main thing is about the Meraglim. Und als Shmo wird dann gerufen the ganze Sedre. The whole Sedre is called Shelach because of the scouters that they sent out. This is Parsha Shelach. So, what is the connection from Mekoshesh to the whole Parsha Shelach? So now we see, according to the Medrash that Tosfos brings down, vor Meise Mekoshesh is gekommen als Tzitzor for Meise Meraglim. Because the story of the Mekoshesh came as a result of the act of the Meraglim, in which they were punished not to go to Eretz Yisrael. The Yidden thought maybe they're not mechuyev in mitzvahs anymore, and the Mekoshesh came and proved to them that he got killed. That means that the mitzvahs are still obligated. So now you see that there is a connection between the Parshas Mekoshesh, not only as Ramesha Darshas to the Parsha Lefoneho, which is Avodah Zorah, but now the Parshas Mekoshes is connected to the whole Parshas Shlach, the name of the Parsha, the whole the story of the Meraglim. Okay? The Rebbe adds now, but it doesn't mean that according to Tosfos, there is no specific connection also to Avodah Zorah. Even though we're explaining that there is a connection between Mekoshes and the Parsha Shlach, but why did the Torah interrupt with Avodah Zorah? So it applies, it means, it follows that the Mekoshes is connected to Avodah Zorah and to the Parshas Meraglim. V'bald, look at this, continue. V'bald Torah stelt Parshas Avodah Salilim. Tzuvishud Maisa Meraglim Parshas Mekoshes. The Torah places the portion of idol worship in between the act of Meraglim Parshas Mekoshes and the one who was collecting the sticks, violating the Shabbos. So this already, according to the Medrash and Tosfos, could have just said the story of the Meraglim, then come the story of Mekoshes, and not the story of Avodah Zorah. So that is understood that Tosfos doesn't negate the Ramesh Adash's interpretation, but he adds to it. Is moving as that also, according to Tosfos' opinion, is Parshas Mekoshes Shaykh to Parshas Avodas Halilin, that the portion of Mekoshes has a connection to the Avodah Zorah. Al derech v'Rashi brings for the Moshe Darshan, as he brings for the Moshe Darshan, doesn't negate what he says, because otherwise it would have said Mekoshes and right after the Parshas Meraglim instead of bringing Avodah Zorah. But that itself has to do also connected with the Avodah Zarah. And the Rebbe says, matter of fact, that Tosis himself, with Tosis is Masbir the Gemara. Tosis explains the Gemara. So we see that there was a connection to the Parshat of Avodah Zarah, even though Tosis says that the Mekoshes comes as a follow-up to the Meraglim, but we see that in Tosis also there is a connection to Avodah Zarah. Tosis says like this. Yodeya Hoya Moshe Rabbeinu Shamakoshes b'misa. Moshe had the general knowledge that the Mekoshes gets the death penalty. It says that put him in to incarcerate him to find out what to do, what the punishment is. So it's not Toshus explains that they didn't know whether he gets misa or not. That wasn't the issue. They didn't know what kind of misa he gets. How did he know? Because the Ferish Pasuk Shenemar, because the Pasuk stated those who desecrate the Shabbos shall be put to death. So he knew he didn't know which that's what he didn't know. But here we see the connection to Avodah Zarah. Why? Because Tosha says like this. Why did he not know what death he deserves? Normally, when there's not a specified death, it doesn't say, it just says Moshe Yumas. It means bechenek. It means choking. That's the death, the non-specified death. So why didn't he know? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu not know what death he gets? The Torah says Moshe Yumas is bechenek. But Moshe Rabbeinu's issue, Tosha explained, because acting publicly to desecrate the Shabbos is almost like Avodah Zorah. It's like Avodah Zorah. So he thought maybe he gets the punishment from Avodah Zorah. So here you see already there's a connection from this case here with the Shabbos, the collecting the Mekoshes, with the Avodah Salim that precedes it. So what does Tosfos explain? Gav the Misa Stam Chenek, even though generally Misa means Chenek, choking. So why would Moshe Rabbeinu have a question? Lo Yod Le Perish Mayasale, they didn't know what to do with him, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to ask Hashem, and the Eibishter said he gets skila. Why didn't he know? Because the pasuk says Moshe must mean Chenek. But because of logically, he compared desecrating the Shabbos to worshiping Avodas Kechavim, the Beskila, that over there you get Skila. So although in the Pasuk it seems that it's Chenek, but he thought that this is more like compared it to Avodas Kechavim Skila. The Mechalel Shabbos B'Farhesia, one who desecrates publicly the Shabbos, is Kikoifer Be'ikar, is like denying the main thing, is like Avodah Zarah. You don't believe in the Eibishter. This is desecrating the Shabbos is like denying in Hashem. Why? The Koifer B'Maisa Bereshis. The whole reason we have Shabbos is because the act of creation, the beginning, the Eibishter created 6 days and he rested on the 7th day, which means that there is a Rebbeinu Shalom, that there is a master, there's a creator, there's Hashem. And if you're desecrating it publicly, you're declaring that don't keep Shabbos. No, the Eibishter didn't create the world, and you're desecrating and you're denying the existence of Hashem. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu thought that maybe it gets skila. So we see that even according to Tosfos, which learns the connection of Mekoshes to the Meraglim, because the whole issue that the Yidden thought not to be Mechal, that doesn't apply, was because of the Meraglim, that they were punished not to go into Eretz Yisrael, and that's why the Mekoshes wanted to show them the Shem Shamayim. But according to Tosfos too, there is still the fact that it comes after Avodah Zarah, after the din of Avodah Zarah, and that is the reason connected also to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. He thought maybe it's Avodah Zarah. Okay, but the Rebbe wants to say that this is not just to compare Avodah Zarah to Mekoshish, just any Avodah Zarah, or to any Mekoshish. But the Rebbe says that this has Avodah Zarah and Mekoshish have a a very special case. It's not just uh, a desecration of Shabbos, but the case of the Mekoshish, the way he desecrated the Shabbos, as we will learn in the continuation of the Sikha, that specifically is connected to Avodah Zarah, because, as the Rebbe will explain, the uh, violation of and the guilt of the Mekoshish is because of its comparison to uh, Avodah Zarah. And that's specifically in the case of Mekoshish, as all will be explained. But that's what the Rebbe wants to say. The Rebbe wants to say that there is a connection specifically between Mekoshish and Avodah Zarah, not just any violation of Shabbos. The violation, the way it took place with the Mekoshish. V'yesh lahoisif, that's what the Rebbe says to add. Here we're just talking about there's a connection between Avodah Zarah uh, and the Mekoshish and Shabbos. But the Rebbe says yesh lahoisif od shayches from Parshas Mekoshish to a Parshas Avodah Salilim. This connection from the portion of the collecting of the wood and Shabbos to the portion of Avodah Salilim is not in them etzem chet from Shabbos Avodah Zarah. So here we are just saying that there is Shabbos is sin, Avodah Zarah, there's a connection between them. Shabbos gets skila, Avodah Zarah gets, just like Avodah Zarah, or that was the reason he didn't know what to do. There is a connection. But the Rebbe says there is more than that. The fact, aber von dem was the smiches is nicht stam in achet stam for Chilul Shabbos. The fact that we made this halacha of a dezorah, the fact that it's not just a general stam for Chilul Shabbos, it's specifically just when there's a desecration of Shabbos, nor zum chet, but specifically to the sin von Mekoshes Davke, of this sin Mekoshes, is mistaber zu zogen, so therefore it's probable, logical to conclude, as Parshas Avodas Alilim Hot Hashayches, that the portion of idol worship has a connection to them oifen. That specific way, what took place with the story with the Mekoshish Eitzim in Chilul Shabbos, the way he desecrated Shabbos. The yes is given by Mekoshish. And the Mekoshish was special to L'Shem Shamayim Niskaven. He had it in mind, as the Rebbe we quoted before from Tosfos, that he wanted to show them that there is still the Torah and you get punished for violating the Torah. So that special Chilul Shabbos, when your really intention is the Shem Shemaim, that is specifically connected to Avodah Salim, as the Rebbe will say. Uh, Basically, that intentions, as the Rebbe will explain, don't matter so much, but mice, as we will learn later on. B'yeshleimar. So this tells us that there's the connection between specifically the case of Mekoshish and Avodah Zarah. And the Rebbe says further also the special case of Mekoshish, which L'Shem Shemaim Niskavna with the whole Parsha Shelach with the Meraglim. V'yeshloimar v'balda dos alts is a tale from Parsha Shelach. Since all this is part of the portion of Shelach, was Ikra is Parshas Meraglim, which mainly is the portion of the Meraglim, darf man sagen that we should therefore need to say, as euch der Inyan, also this specific way of Chilul Shabbos that L'Shem Shamayim hat a Shayches zu dem Teichen von Meise Meraglim. It has a content connection. 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 It has a content to the content of what happened by the Meraglim, we'll see that all these three things are connected. The Mekoshish, Avodah Zorah, and the sin of the Meraglim. So that's what the Rebbe is basing now, setting out to do, to show how these three aspects of the parsha of the Mekoshish, Avodah Zorah, and Meraglim have a common theme, specifically the way the Mekoshish violated the Shabbos. And the Rebbe will now go to explain uh, how that special thing with the Mekoshish, what that special kind of violation was by the Mekoshish. And the Rebbe is going to ask if the Mekoshish wanted to prove uh, that you violate the Shabbos, you still get punished. That's what he set out to prove. Why did he have to use such a severe punishment of death penalty violating the Shabbos? Why didn't he do something that he would get lashes for or have to pay money and show that the Torah still existed? Why did he have to do such a tremendous violation? And the Rebbe actually brings out that the violation of Shabbos, he didn't really violate Shabbos because since it's called a malacha shein tzrich legufa, he didn't really need, according to Reb Shimon, you're exempt, which means he didn't need the wood. He just wanted to collect the wood on Shabbos, not because he needs the wood itself. He wanted to teach them a lesson. So the Rebbe is going to explain while he still deserves the punishment of death because the action was done and the Beis Din doesn't know what's in his mind. He deserves it. That shows us the advantage of Maisa, which is the same by Avodah Zorah. It's the Maisa. We don't care what's in your mind over there. And the same is with the Meraglim. They were concerned about the Maisa going into Eretz Yisrael versus the desert, as we will see. Let's go weiter base inside. Wird man das verstehen behagdim abir bedivra hamedrash was Toysus bringt. We'll understand this by introducing an explanation in the words of the medrash that Toysus brings down. He says the l'shem shamayim niskaven. He says they had in mind that was for Shem Shamayim. Shahoyu Emrim Yisrael. The Yidden would say Kiva Shenigzar Aleim. Shaloi Lukonis La'oretz Ma'asim Meraglim. That since it was decreed upon them not to go into Israel because of what happened to Meraglim, Shuv Ein Mechuyav Mitzvahs, they said they're not longer obligated to mitzvahs. Amad V'chilul Shabbos Kidesh Yahareg V'yiru Achedim. So he stood up, he desecrated the Shabbos so that he should be killed and others will see that the mitzvahs, that the laws, that the mitzvahs, you're still mechuyev. So the Rebbe asked, in that case, why did he have to do such a severe situation? To bring in azmis noch als mechuyev mitzvahs, in order to bring out that you're still obligated mitzvahs. Why did it need to dafke desecrate the Shabbos? Ubefrat, especially as durch dem kommt zu noch a chet godel b'yeser. By desecrating the Shabbos, it comes an additional sin. Not only did he violate the Shabbos, but he caused death to himself. And the Eibishter, it's like causing your loss of your own life. It says, the blood of your souls, Hashem will demand, shoifer dam atzmai, one who pours his own blood. You violated the Shabbos, you caused yourself to be killed. He leads to the fact that he's getting killed. So not only is he violating the Shabbos, but he's self killing him, may cause himself death. So why did he need to go to such an extreme case and violate the Shabbos? As gekonta bringen, he could have brought out this idea durch over sein of another mitzvah. He could have violated another mitzvah. Biz achet kal b'yoser. He could have done a very light sin. Malchus mamnuk which obligates you lashes, money, similar. Didn't have to go and violate the Shabbos and lose his life over this. Um, so why that? So the Rebbe says there is a another explanation, um, not like the Medrash just says they didn't know that there is an obligation of keeping mitzvahs. The Targum Yonason has it a little different. He says they didn't know the uh, the punishment. Uh, they didn't know what the punishment for Shabbos. So according to the Targum Yonason, he needed to violate the Shabbos. That's what they didn't know. But the Rebbe is asking on the Medrash. The Medrash didn't say specifically Shabbos. The Medrash says they didn't thought they're not mechuyev b'mitzvah. So why did he choose Shabbos dafke according to the Medrash that Tosfos brings down? So that's the Rebbe's question. But the Rebbe says, "Euch in Targum Yonason steht der Klolus HaToichen." Also in the Targum Yonason, it is brought down the general contents. And the Mekoshes Eitzim hat nit gemeint Mechalel sein b'mezid, that he also did not mean to intentionally violate the Shabbos. Nor l'shem shemayim niskaben, he also had in mind. But he has a different L'Shem Shamayim, not just to tell you that Mechuyev mitzvahs, but to tell you what the punishment of Shabbos is. Aber the Targum Yonason, Bavoren Farvoser Dafke Mechal Shabbos given. But in the Targum Yonason, over there is the answer. He cautions us and he tells us why did he specifically need to be Mechal Shabbos. About no demot nor gevus gezeres Shabbat. They knew the decree, the violation. You can't violate Shabbos. Aber der Einish for Chilul Shabbos. But what punishment you get for violating, desecrating the Shabbos? Knosha the Shabbat lo yish t'moid. That wasn't known to them what the punishment is. So is those given the kavona from the Mekoshes Eitzim? This was the intent of the one who collected the wood, as of Zaina Meisim, through his action. We will find out what's the punishment. You'll find out the punishment of Shabbos skila that he got to all of the Jewish community. The whole house of Israel knew. So over there we understand. He explains why he had to violate the Shabbos. But that doesn't answer for the Medrash. But according to the Medrash, he was trying to teach them that the Torah still continues even after the Ma'asim Meraglim. According to the Medrash that brought in Tosfos, that the reason the Mekoshes did it, to bring in that you're obligated mitzvahs, all mitzvahs, is nicht moving for Vosoteres Shabbos genau. Why did he choose the desecration of Shabbos? Why not something lighter? And why not something which would cause him to lose his life, which is another, on top of that, another matter? So the Rebbe explains, based on the Marsha, that while he violated the Shabbos, he wasn't really guilty for the violation of Shabbos. And while he lost his life, but that was because based on, and that's the point of here, is the Bir Bozeh, the explanation. Why did he choose Shabbos? Al pi divrei Marsha, based on what the words of the Marsha. Of the Shaila, the Marsha has the question, V'azoyoter mechalel Shabbos given, how could he desecrate the Shabbos ki lo'idei lo'idia in welchem michze men is mandana mechalel Shabbos, in order to let know what misa you would judge a mechalel Shabbos. How does that allow? How does that allow for you to go and violate the Shabbos because you want to teach us what the punishment of Shabbos is? How could you do that? I mean, why would that be allowed? Why would that be l'shem shamayim? And his masbish, the Marsha explains, "V'bald as hotzu der melocha nit gedacht onkommen." Since he did not need to come out to this work, he didn't need those sticks. He didn't need the kosher. And therefore, nor leida beis misachulu. The whole purpose was to find out what the death, what type of death is there. Habele melocha she'ein tzricha legufa. That's called the work of collecting violation, the Shabbos, of collecting those woods, is considered a job that he doesn't need the job itself. As for example, Kamoi, Choifer Guma vein tzorich elo la'afor. Digging a hole in the ground would be a violation of Shabbos. But that is if you need the hole. But if you don't need the hole, you end up making a hole, but you're trying, you want the sand, then that's called a melach she'etzrich legufa. Shu pater l'Reb Shimon. According to Reb Shimon, you pater. Uner firtois. And that Marsho says, V'chen yesh leimar lifi ha-medrash shekosva teisus chulu. So we can also say, according to the medrash that Teisus brings down, that he didn't want it to tell them that you're still mechuyev b'mitzvahs. That type of violation of Shabbos is not for the sticks, it's just to let them know that they're still mechuyev. It's a melacha etzrich legufa. You're not really liable for that. You're potter, you're exempt, because that's a melacha shein etzrich legufa according to Reb Shimon. V'apizeh is move on loit the medrash hamuva b'toisus. So according to this, it's understood, according to the medrash that Toisus brings down. We knew already, according to Targum Yenison, we know, but according to the medrash, which brings down, he just wanted to tell them mitzvahs. Why did he choose Shabbos? Why he brought out this idea that you mechuyev b'mitzvahs specifically by the Melechas Shabbos, violent Melechas Shabbos. He didn't really want to do a sin. But together soll sein bitter now. And he wanted to verify that there is still mitzvahs. So how could you not do a sin and still figure out and let everybody know what the penalty is, or that there is a penalty? How do you do that? Und das ist Davke bei Shabbos. You can only do it by Shabbos. Was Malacha she'ein tzarich legufa is potter. This concept, doing a malacha that you don't need for itself as potter, is a concept of Shabbos. So he didn't really want to violate any part of the Torah. But how could he teach the people the laws that Shabbos applies at the same time and not violate it? That is only by Shabbos, because over there the halacha is melach she'etzrich legufa is potter l'Reb Shimon. Bis via stating Kedushas Levi, to the extent the Kedushas Levi writes, Im kein lechilul Shabbos klal. In that case, since he did it l'shem shemayim for other purposes, he never violated the Shabbos at all. So he didn't really violate the Shabbos. So the only way to do an Aveira and not violate the Shabbos is by, and not violate the Aveira, is by Shabbos, because by other mitzvahs, there's no such a thing that it's Ein Tzricha Legufa. It's only by Shabbos. So by Shabbos, you can violate the Shabbos, you get punished even though you're not violating it. But here it needs explanation. The Rebbe is going to explain. So if we're saying that he didn't really violate the Shabbos, so why did they put him to death? Though how did he showed them that you get skila, but why did he get skila? He didn't violate the Shabbos. And here the Rebbe is going to explain the idea that while Melacha she'ein tzarich legufa is potter, is conceptually in halacha, but practically when the Beis Din sees you collecting, and you were warned that you can't collect, and they don't know what's in your mind, you are going to get misa, and you deserve misa because the Torah. But it's still not considered a violation because in his mind it's a malacha shein tzirich legufa. Let's see, this is a very fine and interesting distinction that the Rebbe makes over here. Gimel. Ava Pikein, now we're saying he didn't really violate. So how did he verify it? Because they killed him. Why did they kill him? Why did they give him skila? Ava Pikein, the Eibishter Gezok, still the Eibishter said, Mois Yumas Ha'ish, Roga Mois Gomer. The man needs to die. You should stone him. As given Mechuyev Misa, that he was liable for death. So why was he liable for death? It was a malach shein tzirich legufa. We're saying that's why it was machal Shabbos because that's not really a violation. So the Rebbe explains like this: Afal pi as klapi shmaya galia. Even towards the heaven, it's open. It's revealed. Hashem knows. As he's given a malach shein tzirich legufa. It was a malacha that he didn't need it. He didn't need the sticks. Well, the Shem Shemaim Niskaven, he intended for the sake of heaven to teach them that the Torah still goes on. Biz, to the extent as the Kedusha Slavi writes, as Lochilu Shabbos Klal, he did not violate at all. Nochmer, not only did it not violate, he was doing it to help Shabbos. Nochmer, the Sapulu to live Shmira Shabbos. It's an act to guard Shabbos. Sein Kavona is given as on the Schal is given Shmira Shabbos. His intention was that the keeping of the Shabbos should be strengthened. Ubechlal Torah mitzvahs, general Torah mitzvahs, by Yidden. He wanted them to show them Shabbos and all Torah mitzvahs. So why was he punished? Even though Hashem knows. Is Mavayr der Marsho, so the Marsho explains, as das is v'lo yodu ha'edim she'isru boy, she'os al dazu. The witnesses that warned him, you have to warn him that he's going to get Misa, they didn't know that he's doing it on the understanding that he doesn't really need it. And therefore, ve'enon elo dvarim shebelev. So these are words of his heart that whatever his intention are. V'donim hoyu oisel misal pia edus. And they judged him to death by the testimony. So the Rebbe explains now. It doesn't mean, oh, he didn't know, he didn't deserve death, but they did it because the Edom didn't know, and therefore he got death. No, that's not possible. Is not a shot in them doesn't mean as Motim Cycle given betos that he got skilla accidentally because the Edom didn't know. Mitzad Hederi Dias Edom because the Edom didn't know. So he shot Taka shouldn't be put to death. They made a mistake because they didn't know. That's not what it means. Because the Torah doesn't kill somebody by accident. But Torah is the Torah Semes. Torah is a true Torah. If according to the true truth, because of his intention, Shabbos Klal, he didn't violate the Shabbos at all, as the Kedushas Levi said. Well, the Eibishter wouldn't say he should die. The Eibishter knows he didn't violate the Shabbos. So why did Eibishter say Rogim Yirgamu, they should stone him? But the pshat is, nor the chiyuvs kila bedine odom is al pi Torah's emes of their ma'aser pula. The Torah's obligation in the laws of man, when you look at it in the laws of man, the way based in, so the Torah, true Torah, says if they're ma'aser pula. For what he did, the intention doesn't help us in this case. It's what he done. Since his act was desecrating the Shabbos, is thus al pidin based in Shalmato. So then the judgment of the based in over here below, apeula vosmis of them mechuyev skila, it's an act which you are liable of stoning. Usis klal nit negeyes and kavona. And it doesn't matter at all what he had in mind was intentional. He is violating the Shabbos, we can't go by his kavanah. And the Rebbe explains in the note over here, even more um, in the note 19. The bottom line is they can't give him the Eibishter doesn't exempt him because of his kavanah, because he is the Maisa. Even though a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, I guess when the witnesses are witnessing that he's using the sand, that's different. But over here, he had something in mind when he was doing it. That's not for Beis Din to judge. Still, I guess we're using the language of Gedushas Levi Lechilul Shabbos Klal. That's not B'dinei Odom, that's B'dinei Shemayim. Uh, so I guess he didn't, that's why they use Dafke Shabbos, because at least by Shabbos, at least B'dinei Shemayim, he is not violating the Shabbos. But B'dinei Odom, this didn't help. This tells us now the uniqueness of Shabbos, that it's the Maisa that counts and not the Kavanah, and the person will get punished by what he did, even though if we took in the Kavanah, maybe it would have been exempt, but we don't do that. And this explains us, because the same idea we have by Avodah Zorah, which is the Maisa that counts and not the intention. Dalet. Alpizei is moving the shaykhs from Parshas Mekoishish to Parshas Avodah Zorah, specifically the connection from this Mekoishish, not just violation of Shabbos, but the way the Mekoishish did it to the Parshas Avodah Zorah. Benegeyet Avodah Zorah gefindt man an inyan meyuchad. With regards to Avodah Zorah, we find a very special idea, was megen gefindt nit b'shar mitzvahs haTorah, which we don't find by the other commands of the Torah. Other mitzvahs of the Torah don't have it. Yeder Eid, afilu akal shebekalim. We know that every Yid, even a lightheaded among lightheaded, b'shas kumtzan nisoyin on Avodah Zorah, when you come to a challenge, a test of Avodah Zorah, is there zich moiser nefesh, quoting from the Tanya, you ready to give up your life, not only on the beliefs in your heart that you're going to believe in Shem. Afilu sheloi lasis rak eza ma'aseh levad. You're not even going to do any act, even if you don't believe in it. Neged amunas havaya echad, against the belief in Hashem one. Kegoy, lishtachvos l'avodah zorah. You're not going to bow to avodah zorah. No yid will bow to avodah zorah. Av she'enim amanim bo klal b'libay. At all, he yet doesn't believe in his heart. You're not going to even do the act of bowing, and you're ready to give up your life for what? Just for a act which has no kavanah in it. And just for the motion of bowing down, you're going to give up your life. That's what a yid will do. Why is that so? What is the problem? Avodah Zorah is not just an act. It's mostly seemingly being something in your heart. You believing in other powers besides Hashem. So why is it that just an act is already so terrible that you give up your life for not even doing an act? Tzarich Bir needs to explain this. This needs explanation. The Iker von Avodah Zorah is the Emunah belief. The main sin of Avodah Zorah is the belief in the heart. It is machshir als mitzias echad mekol haberuim eisem Eibishter, that you make important and you make it into an entity, one of the creations besides Hashem. You're saying a malach, you make him important, a galgal, a sphere, a koichav, or a star. Avodas kechavim, you're worshiping the star, and is mekabel the avodas kechavim al tzalakah. You accept that service of the stars, making it into a god. So that's the intention over here. B'shas hazeh moment bok klal b'liboy, but when the Alter Rebbe writes, even when he doesn't believe in it at all in his heart, he doesn't believe in it. It's just an act of bowing. He's just nicht der Chet von Avodah Zorah. That's not the sin of, he's not really idol worship. Hat sich nicht abgerissen von dem Ebersten. He didn't tear himself away from Hashem. Uleidoch. And on the other hand, b'shas is sich nicht moiser nefesh. If a yid does not give up his life, in this case, in a case of Avodah Zorah, kommt ihm nicht kein Einisch, he doesn't get punished for that. Was ist am meisten bei Einisch? Because this is an act which he's done against his will. He's been forced to do that, as the Rebbe brings down from the Rambam. So, if he does violate and he does not give up, then it's called an act be'oinus. So we see that the Maisa itself really doesn't really carry that much weight. You need to, it's a belief system, and just for doing, there's not going to be a punishment. So why are we saying that one should give up his life for something which doesn't seem like accepting any other God? Nor wie bald das ist a Meise von Avodah Zorah. But so what's the reason? Since this is an act of Avodah Zorah, afila das ist nicht der Teuchen achet shel Avodah Zorah. Even if this is not the content, it's not the idea of the sin of Avodah Zorah. Heistos by Eden Dolomato. So the way this is called by us here below is Avodah Zorah. That's Avodah Zorah. Of them Meiser Nefesh, and you give up your life for that, because in our case this is Avodah Zorah. The Yid will give up his life. Und das ist der Hemmschach von Parshas Mekoshes Eitzim bei Yom HaShabbos zu Parshas Avodah Zorah. So this is the flow, the continuation of the portion of Mekoshes Eitzim on Shabbos zu Parshas Avodah Zorah. Melachas Shabbos is doch kol teuchno verbunden mit Machshavte v'kavanosei. The whole Shabbos, the whole idea of Shabbos is tied to his thought and his intention. Meleches machshavos osra Torah. The Torah only prohibits a thoughtful act. If you do something accidentally, it's not a violation of the Shabbos, because it's not, violation means a thoughtful act that you're doing. It's your mind. Was the faris when nit chayiv oif ha-melacha shenetzirich legufo. And that's why you're talking not obligated for a melacha that you don't need it, because in your mind you're not really doing a melacha, even though the act is the same. Obefrag benidin dedan, especially in our case, Bezeratos giton l'shem shamayim, he did it for the sake of Hashem. Is das klar nit kein Meiser for Chilul Shabbos? So this is not an act of Chilul Shabbos at all, because he wasn't, his mind was not to do a malacha Shabbos. His mind was not to desecrate the Shabbos. It's not a thoughtful malacha, the violation of the Shabbos. Afal became, and yet, the bald as the Meise mitzad atzma, since the act in itself, the azet ois in welt, as it appears in the world, is dos a Meise for Chilul Shabbos. It's an act from desecrating Shabbos. Because warum dos was is given am loch shenetzrich legufa, the fact that you didn't need it for itself, hat sich das klar nicht angesehen in der Meise, that wasn't visible in the act. The act seemed like a regular act, and therefore you're liable for that. Is al Torah's emes kumt im skila of der Meise. So according to Torah, which is true, he deserves skila for that act. So it flows very well with Avodah Zorah, which, while there is no intention yet for the act itself of Avodah Zorah, there is a violation, and you have to give up your life for that. The person gives up the life. The same thing is the Mekoshish, even though it's all about the intention, But yet, if the act doesn't express the intention, it looks like a regular act, it is an act, and you would be chayiv for that. That's how it follows Avodah Zarah. And now it also follows in the content of the Meraglim. Over there, too, the issue was the act, and that is what uh, was the problem with the Meraglim, in which they erred. Hey, a pikol anal that men ook verstehen the shaykhs betoichen will also understand the connection in the content from Maisa Mekoishus to Maisa Meraglim, from the story with the Mekoishus to the act of the Meraglim. It says Mavur become Mekoimis, it's explained in many places. At the time for was the Meraglim haben gewollt bleiben in Midbar. The reason why the Meraglim wished to stay the desert, und nicht reingehen in Eretz Yisrael, not go into Israel, Israel, is weil der Iker Eise von Eden in Midbar. Because the main occupation of Eden in the Midbar, wo sie haben sich nicht gedacht vernehmen mit Etzek Aparnasse v'chulu, in which they did not have to occupy themselves with the occupation of a livelihood, etc., is given. So what was their main occupation? Given limud Torah. They were studying Torah. There was no act of mitzvahs there. So Ukamayim Chazal, Leinit no Torah lidrish aloich lamon. They say the sage of blessed memory said the Torah was given to expound. They ate the mon, meaning they're eating the mon. They didn't have to work for their living. They were given. They can expound the Torah. They can learn the Torah at the highest level. That's because they're not involved in the physicality. They don't have to work for their sustenance. But limud Torah, the study of Torah is ikrei, the avon of hasoga. Mainly, it's the understanding and the grasp, b'seichel machshava, in your intellect and your thought, and also to bring it down in speech. So they wanted Eretz Yisrael to be intellect, emotion, speak. Mashenkin Eretz Yisrael, as opposed if they go to Eretz Yisrael, Meraglim didn't want to go. Was dort is doch sheishon im tizra sodecha goimer tizmer karmecha. According to the pasuk, 6 year you need to sow the fields. You got to prune the orchard. So they didn't want that. Ubipnimi is that ikra aveda dort. And the inner, what is the main service in Eretz Yisrael is maise, mitzvahs maisius. It's action, the mitzvah action. Ubefrat kima mitzvahs atluim ba'aretz, especially to fulfill the mitzvahs which are hinged at Eretz Yisrael. Once you go into Eretz Yisrael, they don't apply outside of Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael. Umaisim tovim bechlal. So the special mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael, in general, good deeds. Uvdin tovin, good deeds. They didn't have that maise in the midbar. So this also explains why did the Yidden think, quoted before from the Medrash, that Tosfos, why did they didn't think that they don't have to do any more mitzvahs just because they were punished to be in the desert? They figured they don't need mitzvahs because you see the Eibishter is keeping them in the desert, so they don't have to do mitzvahs. Damit wird man verstehen die Medrash über Tosfos and all. With this, we can understand the words of the Medrash that Tosfos brought down. So, Oimrim Yisrael, the Yidden would say, Kiva shenigzar aleihem shaloi lekones la'aretz v'ma'asim meraglim, since they were decreed upon them not to enter Eretz Yisrael because of the story of the meraglim, shuv ein mechuyavim b'mitzvah, they're not obligated in mitzvahs. From Pashtus Lashon Medrash is mashma, from the simple language Medrash it appears, as ob nit gemeint moidet sein in the Meibishten Chas v'sholem, that they did not have intention, they didn't mean they want to rebel against Hashem, God forbid, that they're not going to, well, mekayim zayin mitzvahs, they won't accept mitzvahs. Not ein mechuyav mitzvah, they thought there's no obligation mitzvah anymore. The surprising, why would they think there's no more mitzvahs? Because they have to spend, it's not that they were going to rebel, oh, they're punished, so they're not going to do mitzvahs, but they thought they're not obligated. Why? What's the reason that they even had such a thought? Wollten sie gesagt, if they said, okay, we were decreed upon death, all of them have to die, So if they have to die already, so they can do Avedis, so they're dying already. So dying here, dying there, doesn't that would be an argument? But it doesn't say that. It just says they're not going into Eretz Yisrael. Why should they not do mitzvah? What does that have to do? Wollten sie gesagt, kivan shenigzer aleihem misa. If they would have said, oh, since on them was decreed misa, okay, it's a boy, or similar to that, but man noch gekent masber sein, then you could have explained sein zerkus al kadaitach, what was they thought. It would still be squeezing a lot, but you could have explained it as Mikiva and Shenikmar Dinam Lemisa. Since their judgment, they have been uh, judged for death. So they're already like a dead person who's Hobnit Kenechiyuvim. And they don't have any obligation. Somebody who is condemned to death already down the line. Aber was ist der Kasal Kadaitoch? But why is there even a thought? Kiva shenigzar aleim shalei lekones laoretz chulu shuvei michiyovim mitzvahs. Since they're decreed not to go into the Eretz Yisrael, they're not obligated mitzvahs. But the Rebbe explains that apia now the Yeshleimer, based on the above, we can say ados kufi given zer kasal kadaitach. That taka was their thought. Vibal das der inyan of Kunisa Loretz is doch beiker tzlib kiva mitzvah b'maisa. Since going into the Eretz Yisrael is mainly to fulfill the mitzvahs in action, haben sie gerechnet, so they thought kiva shenigzar aleim shaloi lekonis le'eretz b'maisa meraglim, that they're not going to go into the land because of what the meraglim did. Shuv ein chiyov b'mitzvahs. They don't have to do mitzvahs, which means mitzvahs have nothing to do with them. They're not doing mitzvahs because they're not going to Eretz Yisrael. Zu sehen nicht scheich da weiter von Kima mitzvahs b'maisa, they don't have a connection to doing the mitzvah b'maisa. Afilo the mitzvahs in welches is eine gewenne chayiv bis damu. Even to those mitzvahs that they were obligated up till then, ubefrat was kama v'kama tzivuyim, there are many in commands and gegeben geworden als Akdomokenis Loretz. They were in the commands that were given as an introduction to entering into the land that it's Yisrael. So they thought this is all as a preparation to Eretz Yisrael. As B'schus, the Torah says, in the mitzvah for the mitzvahs that are in Eretz Yisrael, they'll go to Eretz Yisrael. But they're not going to Eretz Yisrael, so the mitzvahs don't apply to them. So their entire service consists of learning Torah. The machshava v'dibur, in thought and speech. Ain't mechuyavim b'mitzvahs, they thought we're not mechuyav b'mitzvahs. Und auf dem kommt der Hemshech von Meise Mekoshesh Eitzim. So that's why it comes later on to this idea of the Meraglim, the story of the Mekoshesh Eitzim. Omad v'chilel Shabbos gedei shehareg v'yiru acherim. He got up, he desecrated the Shabbos, so that he would be killed and others would see. This brings out as euch in den Yonim was kol teuchenom is meleches machshavas. Even in those aspects which their entire content is meleches machshavas, which is Shabbos. When the was giton l'shem shamayim and he did l'shem shamayim. What do we see? Nito favor sein of Rasan Hashem. He didn't do it to violate the will of Hashem. Und deswegen, but yet is euch posed der iker the meise bepoil. Here too, it's the actual action. Was the Fat zok teres emes as the psak halacha lamato is that the Torah is true, which is the Torah which is true says. Now, what is the ruling? Ados is chilul Shabbos. This is chilul Shabbos. When es kommt der far skilla, and then you get skilla, even though that this isn't not meleches machshavos, and this is not a violation, and he wants to preserve Shabbat. It doesn't help. We go by the Maises. Und das soll gelernt die Yidden, was ein Damut geblieben in Midbar. And that's taught the Yidden that remained in Midbar. As Afal Pisha Nigzar Aleim Shalei Likonis Loretz, even though they're not going in to the land, Yisrael is das nur, as they kommen nicht on zum Iker Kiyum Mitzvahs B'Maisa. They're not going to reach to the main observance of Mitzvah Maisa, which is going to Eretz Yisrael. We see in Eretz Yisrael as in Eretz Yisrael. But also they, verbleiben dik in Midbar, while they're in the desert, is the Avodah Negeya The service is important. Vidos kommt darauf in Meise bepoil that comes down in actual action. Viful Shaykh Midbar to the extent it belongs to the Midbar. But Iker Inyan HaMitzvah, because the main idea of mitzvah, which is tzavsa v'chibur mit neibishtim. How do you connect? How do you become together and tie yourself mechaber to the Eibishtim? Is durch Maisa mitzvah, is through action of the mitzvah. So we learn it from Shabbos. So all things are connected. Avodah Zorah is the Maisa, Shabbos is the Maisa, and the Meraglim need to know that the main thing is the Maisa, even as they are in the desert. This is Mesichel Shabbos Parshas Shelach Tovshin Yutes and Motzoi Shabbos Kodesh A Tovshin Lametes.